Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Share the adventures of our early pioneers as we explore the development of the Pacific Northwest and beyond. With your host, Mike Roberts, and historian Bill Barlee.
Well, welcome to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Mike Roberts and Bill Barlee, and we are always telling you stories about riches, but forget the gold for this occasion, or a little bit forget the gold. Silver's the name of the game, and we're heading south of the border.
Oh, yeah.
Where to?
When you talk silver, Mike, you talk Idaho. When you talk silver in Idaho, you talk the Coeur d'Alene country. And that is, I think, some of the most intriguing country in the Pacific Northwest. Not much doubt about it at all. And the reason is, you hear a lot about the Comstock lode in Nevada. And the Comstock has, has all sorts of stories about it. The Comstock couldn't touch the Coeur d'Alenes. Comstock produced probably just over 300 million ounces of silver. There was one mine in the Coeur d'Alenes that produced over 300 million ounces. And the total from the Coeur d'Alenes, up to date, and there's still minings operating there, is over 1 billion ounces. 1 billion ounces.
Of silver.
And climbing.
And climbing.
And climbing.
Well, what's the significance? Obviously, these silver dollars is, I love the sound, too.
If you have 100 silver dollars, or if you have 1,000 silver dollars, you can figure that about 50 of them came from silver out of the Coeur d'Alenes.
That is controlling the market.
Not much doubt about it at all.
Okay, we're going to come back in just a second. We'll tell you the story because obviously there's lots of mines and lots of stories out of this part of Idaho. We'll show you that in just a minute. Welcome back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. I just love this story, and I've never seen Bill more excited about telling a story than this area, the Coeur d'Alenes. Oh, okay, Idaho joins up the Canada-U.S. border just between Washington and Montana. And then it's got that long neck that drops down before it opens up. That's what you call the panhandle. Where's Coeur d'Alene in all of this?
Towards the bottom of the panhandle.
Just before the pan opens up, there's the Coeur d'Alene.
The Coeur d'Alene area. Yeah. That's right, not to be confused with Coeur d'Alene town. And this, as we said, was the silver mining area of the nation. But, it really got its start in placer gold. And a guy called Andy Pritchard came in there in 1878. By 1883, it hit a good creek, which they named after him, Pritchard Creek. And two towns were established, a town called Murray and a town called Eagle City. Mm-hmm. And like all placer gold, there were fortunes made in the placer gold and in the so-called gold belt of the Coeur d'Alenes. But it doesn't last long, because once you've finished with the placer, it's gone. Nuggets ranged up to about 33, 34 ounces. These are recorded. And that's almost 3 pounds troy, 12 ounces of the pound. In fact, there's a famous story of two individuals, a guy called Ellerhorst and Nestler, two partners, discovered a nugget.
Ellerhorst and Nestler. Okay, got a nugget.
Yeah. Almost 2 pound nugget. And the agreement was whoever grabbed it first, it was theirs, keepers.
Yeah.
So Nestler, they both saw it at the same time. He steps on it. And, Ellerhorst steps on it. Nestler drops his handkerchief over Nestler's boot, and then reaches down and picks up the nugget. But anyway, they decided to share it, okay?
They were good partners.
That's right. It was worth about $400 in the time, about $17, $18 an ounce. And unfortunately, Nestler owned his landlady about $175. She wants the nugget. So they don't know what to do. And finally, she convinces them they've got to chop it in half. So they both try to chop it in half. They're unsuccessful. Ellerhorst he can't do it. Nestler doesn't do it. The axe bounces off. So the woman's kid, George Heller, actually, I think that was his name, 17 years old, he says, let me have that. And he puts it on the chopping block, and he takes that axe, and he swings it down, splits that thing absolutely almost dead in half. One part weighed $200 in gold, and the other $204. So he was 50.5% to 49.5%.
Nice, good anecdote.
Right.
Good anecdote.
When she took it to the bank in Wallace, the clerk looked at that, and he says, gosh, Miss Heller, that looks like it's been chopped in half. She says, you're right. But the gold, of course, disappeared.
Yeah.
But it was the lure, it was the attraction that brought the lode miners into the area. They started looking through the gold belt for gold, didn't find a lot of lode deposits there. There were some and some good ones. But then they started spreading out to the south. And when they spread out to the south, they just started discovering some really magnificent mines. And I think the first one we should mention, and not in order necessarily of importance, Mike, was the Hercules Mine. And the Hercules Mine is discovered in 1889. Two guys go up Canyon Creek, which is near Old Burke. And
I remember that
a guy named Day and a guy named Fred Harper. And they come across a fairly small stringer of quartz with some silver in it. Doesn't look great. And anyway, they decide to work away at it. And they start working away at it. And as they get down, the vein gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, till eventually it's up to about 50-odd feet.
50 feet.
Yeah.
And it started as just a tiny little...
6 inch.
6 inches.
That's right. 6 inches wide. That's all. So they were, in many respects, lucky they followed a hunch. But a lot of miners follow a hunch. Doesn't pan out at all. And these guys, but they were both working outside, and they decided to take in some partners. So they parcel off an 1/8 of an interest and a 16th and another 1/8 and another 16th, but they still maintain control. The first year, they pay out $102,000 in dividends, and they have $200,000 in cash in the bank. That's a lot of money in 1889, 1890.
Boy.
That's a lot of money. Then they start paying out monthly dividends of $8,000, and then extra dividends of $8,000, $8,000, $8,000, 2 or 3 a month. It ran right, the Hercules ran right till 1925. For many of those years, Mike, it paid $1 million in dividends, and $1 million, staggering in today's money. At the end of its run in 1925, it had paid out $23.5 million.
Well, no, this money, how did Harper and Day do? Were they just rolling in the dough?
Oh,
or
yeah,
what?
they did very well. One of the Day's sons, tried to reopen it, was not successful.
But that's spectacular.
Oh, yeah.
$23.5 million from, what was the name? The Hercules.
Yep, the Hercules.
Another mine.
Let's take a look at another one. This is called the Page. And again, 2 Irishmen, Connolly and Corrigan. A lot of Irishmen in this area.
Sounds
Really
like
quite startling. They were working down west of Kellogg on a little creek called Silver Creek. And again, kind of a small little vein, and they start working out. They continue to peck away at this claim for about 20 years, not quite 20 years. And they do fairly well, but they don't realize its potential. They then sell it to a big company called the Federal Mining Corporation, which is now a much larger corporation, and they retire. Within 1 year, one of the partners is dead, and 12 months later, his other partner falls into the grave.
Were they violent deaths, or did they just sort of peter out?
No, it just worked out. And the Federal Mining Corporation took out several hundred millions of dollars in silver, lead, and gold, and zinc. Just really quite.
$100 million.
So this is the Page mine. And you have lots of other mines. You have the Pullman, and you have the granite, and you have the Hecla, and you have all sorts of mines. But this next mine is, I think, one of my favorite mine stories for several reasons.
Yeah.
Okay, and this is the so-called Bunker Hill in Sullivan, and a very famous name in Idaho, probably the second most famous mine in the Coeur D'Alenes. And interesting story, because what happens is, in about 1883, a guy called Noah Kellogg.
Oh, Kellogg, Idaho.
That's right.
He gets recognized, but he starts off small.
Starts off as a placer miner up around the Murray area, doesn't get paid completely for a job he's done, so he goes to 2 individuals to get a grub stake. Now, a grub stake is an arrangement between the prospector and a couple of businessmen or one businessman. They provide you with grub and tools. You go out. If you discover something, they get half.
Yeah.
So he goes to a guy called Dr. John Cooper and another individual called Origin Peck. Was the name of the guy. Origin.
What a great first name. Okay.
Okay. And he said, look, you give me a grub stake, anything I find, you get half.
Yeah.
Handshake deal. They give him $18.50 plus a jackass. One jackass.
A jackass.
Okay? $18.50, gets a few tools, gets some grub, and he sets out. This is August the 1st, 1885. Okay? August the 1st. He sets out, looks, and he goes down on the southern part of that in what we call now the Silver Lead region or the Silver Lead Belt, and he looks through a lot of draws. Doesn't really do very well. Comes back later in the month, and he says, well, look, he said, I've run out of grub again. They renew the agreement. He keeps the jackass. They give him another probably $18.50. He goes out again, and he comes back this time on the 13th of September, 1885.
Okay.
Now, he said that he had run out of grub when he approaches them.
A second time.
Yes, but he ran out of grub 4 days previous, he said. He ran out on the 9th.
September 9th, I ran out of grub, and I've come back.
That's right. And now he is saying to them, essentially, that the deal we had is no longer viable.
Yeah. Because I ran
The contract is being broken because I ran out of grub. So they believe him because they didn't think he'd found anything, right? Then they hear word of mouth that he has made a magnificent discovery on a place called Milo Gulch, which is Milo Creek flows through Milo Gulch. And they go to court. And he explained that he had found it after and so on and so forth. They said no. They said from what we heard, and evidently he'd done a little bit of talking, the jackass found it. And their story was this. Their story was this, Mike. They said that he was out possibly with a guy called O'Rourke, who was his fellow O'Rourke, was a partner of Noah Kellogg. Yeah. Partner, that's all. But maybe he was there and maybe he wasn't. The claims were staked under his name, yeah. Okay? And they were out prospecting, and evidently they were getting short on grub, and they did enough grub to get back to Murray, which is quite a distance away. Yeah. So anyway, they go to pick up their jackass, and the jackass, this is the job of Noah Kellogg. He's aboard the jackass. He goes to pick up the jackass retreats a few paces, and he goes a few more paces, and the jackass goes over the edge of the hill, and Kellogg follows it over the edge of the hill, and the jackass goes across the creek, and Kellogg follows across the creek, and jackass goes up the hill on the other side, and Kellogg follows up the hill on the other side. He's very unhappy. He's a very unhappy man, because he doesn't need that, you know. So he grabs himself a big stick, and the jackass is standing up there in a little semi-clearing, kind of a little height of land there, and he goes up there, and he's going to lay a beating on the jackass. Looks, jackass is standing on a vein of silver that would knock your eyes out. He stakes it under O'Rourke's name, and this becomes the famous, absolutely famous mine, which was called the Sullivan and Bunker Hill, okay, or Bunker Hill and Sullivan, whichever you want to call it. And then lawsuit comes up. Jury says, no. Kellogg wouldn't do this. They find Kellogg not guilty and O'Rourke not guilty. The judge overrules them. He said, I think there was an understanding. I believe that Dr. Cooper and Peck deserve 1/4 of this ground.
Yeah, well, the guy wouldn't have been there. It happened so close. Yeah. Who's keeping track?
That's
There's
right.
a latitude in understanding.
And he may have been playing games.
And so anyway, the doctor and Peck get something.
They get 1/4 at the time, and they know it's bonanza ground, because the Bunker Hill and Sullivan is bonanza ground. They get 1/4 at the time, and I assume they get rid of it. But then comes into the scene a very interesting guy, a guy called Jim Wardner. And Wardner is a fascinating character. He's larger than life. He's an entrepreneur. He's a mining promoter. His word is as good as his bond, which is interesting in that particular area. And he says to Noah Kellogg, he said, Mr. Kellogg, by the way, never Noah.
Oh,
nobody
Mr.
addressed
Kellogg.
Nobody addressed Kellogg as Noah in the town of Wallace or Kellogg or Wardner. They don't know anybody, even his partner. They always called him Mr. Kellogg. Very reserved man, very scholastic. He said, Mr. Kellogg, I think I can get a buyer for you.
Buyer for all this, this great
so
mine you got.
Kellogg's been out there in the hills for a long time. He says, okay, see what you can get. And, of course, Wardner's going to cut himself in on it. He goes down and sees a financier in Portland, Oregon, Simeon Reed, R-E-E-D.
Simeon Reed.
Simeon Reed, R-E-E-D, okay?
Yeah.
And Reed says yes, and he's showing all the samples. He's taken up to the property. He says, I'll give you $650,000 cash. So he does make that deal. He gives Wardner $650,000 cash, and probably Noah Kellogg got somewhere around $150,000 to $200,000, plus some shares in the mine, okay, the Sullivan and Bunker Hill. And then O'Rourke gets a bit, and Wardner gets a fair amount, and the lawyers get some, but everybody's happy. Everybody's happy. And you have pictures, you have photographs of Kellogg's mule. You know, there's a photograph, there's a very prominent photograph of Kellogg's mule and Wardner, and there's the mule, and they're supposed to discover the mine. And a lot of people poo-pooed it since that time. They said, no, that's nonsense. Well, I don't think it was. I think that the original story of the jackass discovering the ground on which the Bunker Hill and Sullivan stood is absolutely right, Mike.
Yeah. Now, you've got some evidence to this effect.
I have evidence that is almost irrefutable.
Okay. Now, here we have some silver spoons.
That's right.
And look at the remarkable silver spoons with a little jackass on the top of each one. And they've got a flower. What flower would that be?
Idaho State flower.
Idaho State flower.
Sterling silver.
Sterling silver. And then on the little spoon parts of the spoon, in hand engraving, you have something that says the Bunker Hill Mine from Wardner. And then you've got the Bunker Hill Mill and the Bunker Hill and Sullivan. Now, where did you find these?
Now, this is very interesting. Several months ago, I'm back in Atlantic Canada, and I have a break at lunch hour, and I spend 15 minutes in one antique store in Halifax. That's all. Just happened to walk in the door, and I said, "Have you got any silver spoons?" Lady said, "Yes, I have." She shows me a whole tray of silver spoons. I look down there, and I see 6 of these. And I kind of casually look at them, and I say, "Oh, there's a jackass or a donkey on the top, yeah? Oh, that's the state flower of Idaho." And then I look down at the inscription on the bowl itself, and it says Wardner, Idaho. I said, that's probably named after Jim Wardner. Then it struck a respondent chord, because what had happened, of course, is the story had circulated, and I'd been told the jackass story years and years ago. But the interesting thing is, the follow-up, I asked the woman, I said, "Where did you get those spoons that came from Idaho?" She said, "I got them from the Reed estate." I said, "How do you spell that name?" She says, R-E-E-D. And I said, "Well, the other stuff from the Reed estate is all from the West." "Yes," she said, "I think he made a lot of money in mining back there." And I think what happened was, once the court case had been settled, once the mine had been sold, once that Noah Kellogg was free and everybody had been paid off, then he told the story to Simeon Reed. Simeon Reed puts it down for history, has 6 spoons struck in sterling silver, commemorating the feat of the donkey, the true discoverer of the Bunker Hill in Sullivan. And, of course, I think that is absolutely as close to proof as you can get.
Whatever happened to the donkey? I mean, how does he spend all this wealth? How does the donkey survive?
Donkey is well treated. Noah Kellogg also made sure the donkey spent the rest of his years in clover at $50 a month, which is equivalent to $2,000 a month today. So the last 7 years of his life, he spent just grazing.
So that head, the fact that these are commemorated, but the fact that the donkey also never did another lick of work in his life, had to be this man's respect for this animal.
Very true. Very true.
And he was going to belay him about the head and ears with that.
Yeah.
That is a great story. So how big did the Bunker Hill and Sullivan mines become? I mean,
well, I would think Bunker Hill and Sullivan probably produced, and I'm guessing a little bit, there are no accurate figures, it's a private company, probably somewhere around 200 million ounces. And I'm guessing, I could be 50 million out either way. But the next mine we're going to tell about is, I think, the premier mine of the area. There's not much doubt about it. In fact, it is the premier silver mine of North America. Nobody really touches it. And this was originally called the Yankee Boy and the Yankee Girl. 2 brothers discover it, True Blake, and Dennis Blake. Both are individuals who were prospecting up in that Big Creek area, and that's down in that silver belt again. And they come across again a narrow little vein about so wide, and they're in there from what, 1884 to about 1903. 20 years, they work away at it.
Yeah. And
they never realize its full potential. You know, these guys work intermittently every spare hour they have. They're making a good living. In 1903, True doesn't feel very well. He marries a widow. She takes him to California, and he has a lot of money to live on, and he dies there in 1900, and I think it was 1910. And at that time, his brother, Dennis, suffers a very severe stroke. She comes back and picks him up, takes him back to California and takes care of him. And then he passes on very shortly after, and then she takes care of the mine. And in 1918, a new company moves in. This is called the Sunshine.
The Sunshine.
Yeah,
I got
Sunshine
something,
bullion.
somewhere around here, we got the Sunshine.
Yeah.
This is a piece of bullion, silver. This is 0.999 pure silver. This is 10 ounce. And it's got Sunshine Silver, the Sunshine Mine.
Oh, yeah. The Sunshine, nothing really touches the Sunshine. This mine had such vast deposits of very fine silver ore that it simply staggered the imagination. It produced by 1980, Mike, 300 million ounces by itself.
By 1980, 300 million, so it operated right to the current day.
Right to 1992.
300 million ounces.
So it's probably produced somewhere around 330 or 325 million ounces. That is more than the entire Comstock lode in Nevada. All the mines in Nevada didn't produce that much silver, as one mine very close to Wallace in the Coeur d'Alene.
Spectacular. The Yankee Boy and the Yankee Girl become... So you, at the beginning of this show, you said 1 billion ounces of silver from this area?
Yeah.
1 billion?
Over 1 billion, because there's still some small mines still operating up around Mullen and in various parts. Not the big ones, but some of the small ones are still operating.
Spectacular. Take a break here. Come back in just a second. We've got a wonderful historic map that shows some of the towns we haven't talked about, but we'll sort of peruse them briefly right after this word. Welcome back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. I've got a great map on my lap. This is a replica of a map of the Coeur D'Alene mining region, Shoshone County, Idaho, 1892. And as we started out the show today, we talked about the gold belt, and there you have it up there. In fact, Pritchard Creek showing, Montana's down to the right-hand side here. And then everybody moved down when the gold ran out to the silver, lead, zinc belt, which is just a little bit to the south.
Yeah.
And there are some towns in here which are fascinating. Tell me about Burke.
Well, Burke is really quite intriguing and has a marvelous history. Up in Canyon Creek, built in a very, very narrow gully,
Yeah.
and it was so narrow that when the train came through in the late 1880s, it came right down the center of the town. In fact, it was so unusual that the train actually came through a hotel. In other words, there was a hotel built on either side of the gulch with a walkway over top, and that's where the train came through. You had to be a very, very sound sleeper in Burke.
This is Burke,
Oh,
right
yeah.
through there.
Burke.
And it had to make lots of concessions to the train, I
Oh,
understand.
sure. The businessmen who had their awnings out, they had to roll them up when the train came through. Otherwise, the train would take those awnings out. That's how narrow Burke was.
And how long did Burke last?
Oh, Burke lasted for probably, in its heyday, well over 60 or 70 years. And some of these towns are still intact. Now, the town that I really find that has the echoes of the past in it is Wallace, Idaho.
Wallace.
And Wallace is the big town of that Coeur D'Alene silver lead district. And Wallace really is quite unique. Badly burned in 1890, Mike. Started in 1888, really got its foundation. Burned in 1890, and it was a wooden town, so they built in brick and stone. And you know, you can go through Wallace today, and you can visualize very easily exactly how it looked over 100 years ago. It had, at that time, it had 30 saloons and hotels, had a population of probably several thousand people. It was the economic and the commercial center. Burke lay to the east, and Kellogg and Wardner to the west, and it was really considered the center of the district. Founded by Colonel Wallace, who used Indian script to buy the land, and then it was found that it wasn't possible to do so. And it has a very checkered history, and we have other towns in the area as well. Mullen is very interesting,
Yeah.
Mike. Old Mullen, and that's just to the east of Wallace as well. And you can rattle around in Mullen, and you get a real feel of the Old West. And there's Kellogg, and then
Now,
there's Wardner.
is Wallace a ghost town today, or what kind of a town is it?
Well, Wallace has really come back to its own, really. It's declared by the U.S. government a national historic site, and indeed it deserves it.
Well, as you said at the beginning of the show, this is a place that created 1 billion ounces of silver.
Yeah.
It was in excess of anything produced in Nevada or Colorado. It was the silver find of North America.
Not much doubt about it at all.
That's spectacular. All started with Pritchard, too. I just love going back over these things. Wallace, Idaho. Take a trip down there if you like right now, and take a wander down into that panhandle of Idaho and have a look at everything that's down there and sort of revel in the past. That's Gold Trails for today, or Silver Trails for today. Back next time. See you then.